so far in a variety of ways. On Sunday, we had this wonderful opportunity to pack uh, birthday bags and more to support families in crisis. I know that you have already engaged, maybe even in some of the in-person opportunities, but this is Service and Justice Week. It's not just Service Week. And justice is one of those categories where there's less opportunity necessarily or need for us to just show up and put our hands to work, but more so for our brains to be used, to begin to think a new way about things that matter in our community. And this is the next level kind of thing of this week. It is easy to put our hands to work, but if we are not working to change the systems at play that prevent people from rising out of poverty, that prevent people from having access, then we're not doing the whole thing, right? So this is our opportunity to learn something. Today we have Phoebe with us. You should recognize her. You won't recognize everyone that we bring up here. Phoebe is a part of our congregation, a valuable part. And Phoebe, many of you will probably already know, is passionate about housing affordability in our area. And I believe that Phoebe will probably tell you it's the number one issue, is the number one issue affecting people at multiple socioeconomic levels in our community. And it will continue to become an issue long term. Also know that many of you maybe know a little bit about it or think you do. It's this word affordability has kind of been the buzzword of 2025, 2026. It's the word that will lead us right into the midterms. Affordability is the conversation at play, and yet in the DC metro area, when you add housing before affordability, it becomes fraught with conflict. I know many of you are hearing this conversation happening in your HOA communities. Some of you are volunteering in places where people are struggling to make ends meet, and you've heard it talked about from a justice perspective already. I want to invite you, though, to take, before we listen to Phoebe, to take a second and remove whatever bias and whatever perspectives you come to the table with today, and have this kind of open heart, open ear to maybe learn something you've never learned before about this. I am over and over again amazed at what I don't know. And so I hope that you will be amazed about what you do not know. I think I will learn something in this period of time that I didn't already know as well. So I'm going to just kind of tune in, and I hope you will too. Prayerfully engage, and be ready then also to engage with your questions later. There will be some Q&A. Phoebe and I will talk, just the two of us, but we want to provide opportunities as well for you all to engage with this, and that's to come. We first want to create a video that gets to you wherever you are, at whatever place and time you might watch this. I know that you may not show up to one place to have this conversation, but it's there, and I hope you'll watch it day or night whenever you can. Phoebe, I want to hand this over to you. We're so grateful to have you. Thank you so much. I'm going to kind of minimize myself, and I want you to take over. And thank you for your heart for this, so that we can bring you here to have this important conversation.
All right, so I'm really excited for Pastor Michelle and I to talk with you a little bit about housing affordability today. So thank you so much for tuning in. And I hope you and we all learn something. Okay, so I'm gonna start with showing everyone this chart, which was part of the City of Alexandria's Housing 2040 plan, which just recently came out, which is sort of their plan for what do we want to do for housing in the next 15 years. And so what this chart is showing is the how average income and the average cost of housing has changed between 2000 and 2025. And so this is just, it's just the change in dollars. This is not adjusted for inflation. So this shows that the median income, and I believe these numbers that you see here are for the city of Alexandria, but I think it'll look, for a region as a whole, I think it looks pretty similar. So the median income since 2000 went up by 98%. So in other words, the median income approximately doubled. Um, and in that same period of time, the average rent and utilities on a one-bedroom apartment went up 169%. So in other words, the cost of renting an apartment grew by much more than people's income grew. And for a two-bedroom apartment, it was more, it was 182%. And then when you look at the cost of buying a home, then that even is on a whole nother level. So the average cost of buying a condo went up more than 300%. And the average cost of buying a single family home went up 284%. So, in other words, the cost of becoming a homeowner went up by about triple what people's incomes went up. So hopefully this kind of gives a sense that we really do have a very serious issue, right? Like we can't just, when we look at this chart, right, we can't explain this away as, young adults having poor money management habits or unrealistic expectations, although there still might be some people who have those things. But we really do have a very serious problem with housing affordability, and this is affecting so many people in so many different ways, from adults who are not able to move out of their parents' home to working people who have very long commutes. To seniors who can't afford to move to a place that better meets their needs as they age, to people who are living in places that have serious health issues like mold and pests, to, of course, people who don't have a stable home at all. But the good news is this is a solvable problem. And so I'm going to share a little bit about how we got here and how, in fact, actually all of us can do our part to help make this a little bit better. Alrighty, so next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a couple clips from a video. Alrighty, and this video, the speaker is actually on the Falls Church City Council, but she also is very good at making great explanatory videos. So this video is called "What Luxury Housing Does to Homelessness." So I'm going to show you a couple clips. This first one that I'm going to show you is talking about some of the data behind what people often see as being the causes of homelessness.
Take a look at the extreme end of housing unaffordability, homelessness. Every year, communities across the country conduct the point-in-time survey on the exact same day, counting the total number of people experiencing homelessness. And when we dive into the data, we notice some really interesting trends, like the fact that San Francisco has almost 5 times the rate of homelessness as other cities like Chicago. So why is that? Well, when we cross-reference these statistics with other data sets, we can actually get a clue as to what fundamental factors drive homelessness. Before we get into all of the data, I'll pose this question to you, dear viewer. What causes high rates of homelessness in a city like San Francisco? Or rather, what do people most often think causes high rates of homelessness in a city like San Francisco? If you want to guess, pause the video right now.
Okay, I will actually pause, and I would encourage you, if you are watching at home, especially if you're watching with your family, to take a moment to guess and then replay.
All right, time's up. Here's what people think causes high rates of homelessness, and one other we'll get to later. Before we dive into the data, here's a quick statistics rule of thumb. You can look at a scatter plot and kind of eyeball whether there's a link with all of the points lined up or not, with everything randomly scattered. But the R-squared is the more precise way to tell if there's a link. Here's the exact definition of R-squared, but super loosely, 0 implies no direct correlation, and 1 is total correlation. All right, let's dig in. First up, drug use. For each of these charts, we have the homeless rate on the y-axis, and for this chart, we have substance abuse rates on the x-axis. Each dot is a city or a state in a particular year, and with an r-squared of 0.06, the data shows virtually no link. And then there are places like West Virginia, which has the highest overdose death rate, the fewest people receiving treatment. But despite that, it has some of the lowest rates of homelessness. And to that point, when you look at homeless populations with substance abuse issues, only 1/3 had substance abuse problems before they became homeless, and 2/3 developed these problems after they became homeless. If anything, homelessness seems to cause substance abuse, not the other way around. All right, next chart. This plots homelessness rate versus the rate of severe mental illness. Again, there's no correlation. Look, I'm sure you've seen mentally ill people on the street, especially if you're in a place like New York City or San Francisco, and frankly, the media loves to cover this sort of thing.
Get the mentally ill homeless who are a threat off the street.
A mentally ill homeless guy.
The street crime, the drugs, the filth, mentally ill, homeless, all of it.
It's something that seems much bigger than it actually is because of how visible it is. There are plenty of places like Alabama that have higher rates of severe mental illness, yet lower rates of homelessness. But homelessness is far bigger than just mental health issues. Severe mental illness just doesn't seem to be much of a driving factor behind high rates of homelessness. Next, we have welfare. And for welfare, there's this idea that because places like New York and California offer more support and safety nets, they then become magnets for homelessness. So here's a chart that plots homelessness rate versus welfare benefits. And yet again, the data shows virtually no link between homelessness and amount of welfare. And as for the idea of people picking up and moving to states with generous welfare benefits, it turns out that as people's income drops, it generally becomes more and more difficult to move. A study found that at least 90% of people in California lived in California before losing their housing. They didn't move there for welfare, they were already living there. All right, next up we have weather. I promise you, the nice weather in California began long before the homelessness crisis. Let's take a look at these two maps. One shows climate and the other shows homelessness. New York, Vermont, Massachusetts have among the highest homelessness rates in the country, and their winter beach season is, well... And the data? R-squared is 0.008. Virtually no link at all. All right, next chart. Homelessness versus poverty. And finally, we start to see a link. It's also the most obvious explanation. If poverty is what drives homelessness, then you'd expect that places with a lot of poverty should also have a lot of homelessness. But it's actually the other way around. More poverty often means less homelessness, and that goes against intuition. For example, let's focus in on this dot. This dot represents Detroit. In 2018, 1 out of every 3 residents was living below the federal poverty line. Yet Detroit had one of the lowest rates of homelessness. People experience poverty everywhere, but the consequences of being poor in a rich area appear to be much more profound. Homelessness seems to be a symptom of affluence, not of poverty. So we know it's not drug use, it's not mental illness, it's not welfare, it's not weather, it's not poverty. None of these are driving high rates of homelessness. So what's left? Let's take a look at our final chart of homelessness versus median rent. And here it seems like we finally have our answer. With an R-squared of 0.57, high rent is strongly correlated with homelessness. As rent goes up, as housing becomes less affordable, more and more people eventually end up without a home. This Economist story captures it well. Few Americans lived on the streets in the early post-war period because housing was cheaper. Back then, only 1 in 4 tenants spent more than 30% of their income on rent, compared with 1 in 2 today. The best evidence suggests that a 10% rise in housing costs in a pricey city prompts an 8% jump in homelessness.
Alrighty. So I would encourage you, again, especially if you're watching with family, to take a moment to pause and talk about if you learned anything or if anything surprised you in what you heard. I don't know if Pastor Michelle, if you want to share if anything about this, your reaction. I will say, when I watched this for the first time, I grew up in California, and I was actually a little surprised to see, no correlation at all between weather and homelessness. Because I think, a lot of people assume that, when you are in a place with nice weather, that removes some of the, danger of sleeping outside, right? So I think that's what a lot of people assume. So it was interesting to see that that's like not correlated at all.
I think the thing that surprised me the most, Phoebe, was the poverty piece. I think I knew ahead of time that mental health and drug use tend to be sensationalized, but I would have expected it to be higher, and that the idea that and it it does make sense and makes me have all kinds of other questions about places like Detroit, right?
Mm-hmm.
However, the idea of like a place like Detroit with as high of poverty it has, the amount of people living actually not under a roof being so low, it does boggle the mind. And there's only one answer then, right? Like it makes it very clear that it's the affluence of an area that where people can't afford housing
Right.
at the cost that our housing is, that causes homelessness to be so rampant in our area.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's the kind of thing where, if you really sit down and think and learn about it, it does make sense, but it's definitely not something that is intuitive to people. Like one of my fellow leads in my organization likes to say, housing breaks people's brains, right? So the next clip I will show, I will skip forward a little bit, and she's going to talk a little bit about what data shows about what can make housing more affordable.
Other cities have successfully kept rents low by adding more housing. Minneapolis added 8% more housing and limited rent increases to 1%. Portland added 7% more housing and kept rent increases to 2%. Tysons, Virginia added 23% more housing and saw rent increases of only 4%. It's even more impressive when you realize that during that exact same time frame, the US added only 3% to its housing stock and saw prices skyrocket by over 30%. To be clear, many homeless people need additional forms of support, but housing is a crucial component. So adding housing can help keep rent prices in check. But is that still true when that housing is luxury housing? Does high-end housing do anything for affordability? Let's go through the theory and then see what the research actually says. So for the theory, let's say Alex moves into a brand new building. Now, his old unit is available for rent and Bailey moves into it. This place is more expensive than Bailey's last spot, but cheaper than Alex's new place. Then Charlie will move into Bailey's old unit, and that chain continues with several more moves, each from older and more affordable spots. The chain will finally end when Tyler moves out of his mom's basement and gets his own spot. His mom sets up an animal rescue in the basement and no humans move in. That's the theory. New units open up older, cheaper units. So let's get to the research. Here's one of the top studies on this topic. Researchers looked at 52,000 people who moved into new market rate units. That's brand new, shiny apartment buildings. Once these people got settled in, researchers then looked at their mail forwarding addresses to see where they actually moved from. And then they looked at who moved into their old unit, and then followed the chains all the way back to the end to the Tylers of the world. Remarkably, what the researchers found is that every 100 brand new market rate units frees up 70 units from below median income neighborhoods. It also opens up 39 units in the lowest income neighborhoods, so those in the bottom 20% of incomes. The study shows how tightly connected the entire housing market is. So building new housing, even at the higher end, results in housing in low-income areas opening up. When it comes to providing affordable housing, building 100 new market rate units is effectively as good as building 39 units of housing in low-income areas. The study isn't alone. Studies from around the world also found very similar results. And while that study looked at a 2 to 5 year window, we actually see the same thing happening over much longer time frames too. When we build enough housing, the expensive housing of yesterday becomes the cheap housing of today. And conversely, when we don't build enough housing, the cheap housing of yesterday becomes the expensive housing of today. Let me show you a few examples. Here's a luxury apartment complex in Houston in 1978 featuring a country club community with cathedral ceilings, decorator carpeting and draperies, and wood-grained cabinetry.
Ooh la la.
That was the expensive housing back then. Here they are today, the esteemed luxury Pines apartments. This doesn't quite look like the luxury of today. And in fact, it's actually renting for $840 for a 1-bedroom, which is well below median market rate. That's an example of luxury housing of yesterday becoming the affordable housing of today. What about the other way? Here's a starter home that was affordable to vets in the 1950s, advertised as
bargain for budget-wise vets with no down payment.
Here it is today. These houses are selling for $800,000. That's 500%. 500% above its inflation-adjusted price. It's now unaffordable to the same kind of people who would have been able to afford it decades ago.
Wow.
Alrighty. Yeah. Yeah, those examples were really striking, I thought, of
Wow.
the affordable housing of yesterday.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, what, like, gosh, that's insane. Okay.
Yeah, so again, if you're watching, I would definitely encourage you to pause and take a moment to think about and, talk about if you're watching with anyone, if you learned anything and if anything surprised you with this part of the video. All right, so the next thing I'm going to share is an article that's going to, I think, get a little bit more into some of what she talked about in the video. So there we go. So this was a really interesting article about some research from Pew, where they really dug into some of the data on cities in America that have built a lot or a little housing in the past few years. So this article is called "New Housing Slows Rent Growth Most for Older, More Affordable Units." All right, so the first thing they show here, I'm actually going to zoom out so we can see this chart a little better. So this is showing how rent changed relative to the highest income quartile in metropolitan areas. So this is showing it's by zip code. And basically this is showing that the lowest income zip codes had the highest increase in housing cost. So it says rents in the highest income quartile were not static, but they increased significantly less than the other quartiles. So this is basically comparing like which zip codes saw the biggest increase. And this is like overall in the United States, I think. This is not for a specific city. But this is really showing that the places where the most low income people live are being hit the hardest. So yeah, this was a really good sentence that kind of sums it up well. So when not enough homes are built in high income neighborhoods, people who would have lived in those neighborhoods can usually afford to move into middle income neighborhoods. And middle-income residents can usually afford to move into low-income neighborhoods, but residents of low-income neighborhoods have nowhere to turn. So that's kind of, similar to what she showed in the video of the affordable housing of the past can become the expensive housing of now, if we don't have enough homes for everyone.
Right, right. It makes me wonder, and I'll save this for the end. I'd love to hear you talk more about um, gentrification and
Mm-hmm.
what like in a place like DC Metro, what do we think of that? So at um, I lived where suburban kind of Hayfield, Kingstowne butts up against Route 1, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm right at the ALX high rise like apartment building, the bit that new shopping center, all the conversation that is happening around the Chuck E. Cheese across Route 1, and are they going to get rid of that Walmart and Chuck E. Cheese on Route 1? And all the conversation is related to I mean it's all how do we beautify Route 1? How do we make
Mm-hmm.
Route 1 more desirable for families to live? How do we get rid of the buildings that have boarded up and replace those with more housing and everything? I tend to I guess my previous understanding of gentrification has been it's just we put nice things in rundown neighborhoods, and then we wait for the right people to move in, the right people
Mm-hmm.
to move. And I say that I'm not, you don't see my video, air quotes, the right people to move in for that to then affect the market and make the value go up in those areas. I but I don't know if that's what I'm hearing from you from this. Like that this may in a place like DC Metro, higher end condos might actually be the answer for the chain. That's
Mm-hmm.
why, yeah, I don't know. I'm listening and not knowing what I should think about what's happening along Route 1.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, so I'm going to show another chart that might help get more into this. So this is showing how rents changed specifically for different types of apartment buildings.
Huh.
So what this is showing on this chart is the top 10 metro areas that built the most new housing between 2017 and 2023. And so this is looking at three different types of apartment buildings, which they call Class A, B, and C.
Hmm.
So they define what this means down here. So Class C buildings tend to be older with outdated features and deferred maintenance and are sometimes in less desirable areas. Class B represents somewhat newer, better maintained buildings. And Class A includes new or recently renovated buildings with high-end finishes, et cetera, et cetera. So what this is showing, so if you look at Austin, which is the one that built the most housing and is kind of, a lot of people see it as kind of being a case study of what can happen if you build a lot of housing. So you
Hmm.
can see for the Class A, which is the most new and expensive housing, rent dropped a little bit between 2017 and 2023. If you look at the Class B, it dropped more. And if you look at the Class C, it actually dropped by more than 11%. So in other words, rent between 2017 and 2023, rent went down significantly for people who live in the oldest and lowest cost apartment buildings. So, in other words, this kind of shows how building a lot of new housing, which, the majority of that is going to be new housing that's pretty expensive, that's for relatively wealthy people. It can actually like directly improve the lives of people who, don't and are never going to live in those homes, but live in older and cheaper apartment buildings. So I found this research
Incredible.
like very striking.
Yes, it's striking. It should alter the way we think about
Hmm.
what's happening in our area, especially.
Hmm.
Yeah. Thank you, Phoebe. I'm gonna turn myself off again so you can.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So you can see like, so this is like the top 10 metro areas. So, right, none of these are Washington, D.C., you can see. But you can see like so for Class A, the most expensive apartments, for some of them, the price of the Class A apartments went down. And in some of them, it went up, which, does kind of make sense because maybe if you built a lot, you just have more of these than you have before. So you're just going to have more new and expensive apartments. So the average cost is going to go up. But in all of these cities, the price of the older Class C apartment buildings dropped over this time period, which, I mean, if you think about what inflation was like, as I'm sure we're all very well aware, between 2017 and 2023, like this is really, this tells us a lot here. Like there really is something very serious happening, and like a lot of people's lives are like actually being made better by this. So that is actually the main part that I wanted to talk about. So, I think we can certainly get into FAQs, and I'd, be happy to talk about the issue of gentrification that you raised. I think that gentrification is one of those words where everyone has a slightly different idea of like what does it actually mean. Yeah, so really like the reason why gentrification can be such a huge problem is when there are like physically not enough homes for everyone. So when you have wealthier people who decide they want to move to a neighborhood and there's like not enough homes for both the people who already live there and people who want to move in, then that's going to lead to, a bad situation for people who already live there are, less able to afford higher rents. But then, when some people will like see a new apartment building and think like gentrification automatically.
Right.
When,
Yeah, that's what I think.
yeah. So like it really, if you had like an older apartment building with 100 apartments and that was like torn down and replaced with a new expensive apartment building with 50 apartments, that would be really bad. That would hurt people a lot. But that's really not what happens like almost ever. Instead, the places where we're building new housing are, in the city of Alexandria, like two of the biggest places where we're building a lot of housing that's going forward is like a former shopping mall, which I live close to, and a like abandoned power plant that was just approved for a bunch of homes. So this is, and we have so many like older office buildings that have a lot of like office vacancy, and those are being, in some cases, like actually the building is being converted if it can be, or if not, it's being torn down and you're building apartments on it. So this is really, it's not replacing people, it's we are adding more options. And now when you have wealthier people who are moving to our area, often for jobs, they have more options than, like bidding up the price on what used to be middle class housing, kind of like the example that she showed in the video.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely think there are places in our area where so-called ghettos are being kind of looked at because of the desire to build, uh,
Hmm.
because of the desire to build higher end apartments and the general aesthetic of the area. There are a few areas that are problematic. I'm thinking specifically in Alexandria City, it's happening. I think more so, not in suburban areas. We say suburban, whatever. What is that? It's like urban suburban, where we are in Kingstowne. We're still right at the right up against the urban area, but in areas like Kingstowne, where we're seeing a lot of development right now, and there is been some controversy around it. It is not, to be clear, replacing previous housing for lower income people. It is providing housing at a different level that
Hmm.
will change the cost of housing for older housing in the area, right? So I think if you want to have an opinion on it, I'm always trying to figure out where do I sit on this?
Hmm.
Paying attention to what it's replacing is a great metric. I
Yes.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
What is it
Yeah.
replacing? It's replacing a golf course. Okay,
Hmm.
yeah, it's taking up a field or an area that used to be owned by somebody for years and nobody ever developed anything. Like that kind of,
Mm-hmm.
that is so with that though, what comes out of that, Phoebe, oftentimes when we see all of this new housing, and especially if there was a green space and the green space is now housing, right? There was nothing there before. Now there is something there before. And a lot of what comes out of that are questions about um, what is the impact going to be on our resources down the road? What is the impact that all this new housing has on our ability to receive these people and receive the traffic that comes along with it, and the students and the schools that comes along with it, and yeah, like, do we have enough? Does our drainage systems prepared for these neighborhoods, and our does our infrastructure in our parks take this in count? Is everything going to be so overcrowded that we none of us enjoy this? That is what the number one thing I hear from our area. How would you speak to that?
Yes, that is something that I hear very commonly, and I think is a very common question that people have. I actually I want to talk about what you mentioned at first about green space first, because I think that's something that is a little bit separate from the rest of the question. So I think when you think about like green space being replaced with housing, I think that really shows why it's so important to build enough housing in urban areas where people already live, like Alexandria. Because, if like the more, malls and power plants and old office buildings we replace with housing in Alexandria, that's fewer, farmlands and forests out in Loudoun County and Stafford and our exurbs that are going to be torn down and, replaced with big houses on big lots. And so I think really, even if like, you weren't someone who lived here, if you were someone who lives in the country and loves the country and wants it to stay the country, the best way to do that is to build homes close to people where a lot of people work in cities so that people can live closer to where they work rather than farther out in like what, should be nature.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there's also I mean, everything that you have shown so far completely upends the idea that um, we are building or we are changing the demographics of a community, or we're bringing where people are moving in who are, these are family centric environments. Like, who might be moving into these apartments? Who might, no, it's not like the, we have a picture of who that might be, as if that person is an outsider and they're
Mm,
going to be moving into our area. Instead, it's seeing the person in our area who is providing us essential services,
yes.
right? The person, I mean, and I'm not saying essential services like your, I'm not saying the person who is maintaining your lawn. I'm saying your Starbucks barista. Like,
Hmm.
like they're driving 25 minutes to come take a job here in this area at a Starbucks because they can't afford to live here. So it is it changes, it should change the way we think about it. It is at every, and this whole housing chain thing, I think, is what does that.
Yeah.
The housing chain is integral to a full community thriving. It
Yes.
cannot be everyone in that community existing and living at the same economic level. It can't be. It has to be
Mm,
that there is diversity of economics in order for the housing chain to exist. So that somebody can move into
yes.
this, so that somebody else can move into this, so that someone else can move into this, and that we want that. If your area doesn't have it, if you cannot not
Yes.
identify an area where your barista could move in, there's a problem. If you can't
Yes.
identify an area where your yeah, where your lawn care person can't move in, then there's a problem in your area. It's like an ecosystem. There's something like it's a breakdown in the ecosystem of the area.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. And it's also that in our area, like people who move to our area from somewhere else are, they're typically not moving here to retire or like to, live here when they do their remote job. Although that's not necessarily a bad thing, but people really move to our area for jobs.
Right.
So if, we want to have a thriving, economy where we have lots of jobs here, then, we have to have places for people who work in those jobs to live in.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think I also want to get to the question about infrastructure and how we support growth of new housing, because that
Yeah.
is
Speak to
a
that.
very
Speak to
common
that.
question that a lot of people have. And
Mhm.
I think that part of it is that um, a lot of people don't realize everything that their local government does, which is understandable. Our local governments do a lot of stuff, and most of it tends to not be in the spotlight. So our local governments, like, absolutely, when a new housing development is proposed, they are looking at all of those things. They are looking at, you know, they're estimating how many new students are going to live here and how that's going to impact the schools that the area is zoned for. They're looking at how it's going to impact, our roads and transportation needs. Um, all New housing developments have stringent like stormwater requirements. So when you're putting in a new development, like, you're required to put in infrastructure to make stormwater handling like better than it was before.
Mhm.
So, you're required to make it better, not worse. And then like parks, like I know for the city of Alexandria, when the city is like planning for, what do we want for this section of the city? Like, what developments might this be able to support? They're looking at like, what are places where, new parks could go in if, the property owner wants to develop, how could we work with them to put green
Mhm.
space in there that people could use? So all these things are things that our local governments absolutely are working hard on. And they have lots of
Yeah.
great people working on that. But I think it's also, I like to zoom out a little bit on this question because I really think, similar to what I was talking about earlier, it starts with jobs. And housing is part of the infrastructure that we need to provide to support the jobs that we have, right? So we
Mhm.
need to, if we want to have jobs, then we need to have housing, and we need to have, make sure we have adequate capacity in our schools and our transportation and our, our parks and our libraries. So all that
Yeah.
stuff is really important, and understandable that people are asking that because this is important stuff.
And therefore, it's a multifaceted, like your energy needs to be multifaceted in this.
Yes.
It's not just about housing. If there is an opportunity for you to meet locally with representatives about the building of a new school in your area, that that's important because
Mhm.
the everything is connected. How the ability to have a new school provides a new avenue for new students, new people to move into these new complexes and for them to build them for these new people. It's all it all is connected. It's all connected. So if you are worried about overcrowding in classrooms, don't just advocate against new communities coming in. Advocate for
Yeah.
adequate schooling, right? More opportunities, more places for students to learn. That's the answer. So yeah, it should change it should help us pivot in every way, the way we see every piece of the infrastructure of our area. Yeah, I appreciate thank you so much, Phoebe, for giving us this kind of holistic view. And I think you have changed my opinion on a lot of things already tonight. And I mean, I knew a good amount. I knew to be open-hearted and open-minded about what to hear, but you have given me so much new information to chew on. And so I'm grateful. I hope that people will watch this and I hope we can have great conversations from it.
Thank
Anything
you.
else? Any
I
last
think so
last
too.
comments for the before we
Um, I think I'm happy to take the one more FAQ if you feel that we
Okay,
have enough
sure,
time.
sure, sure. So I think in this area, often I hear other things about, uh, like housing is so expensive right now because all these private equity firms are just buying up all the houses, and it's not it's a case on what's the cause of why the housing is so expensive. Oh, it's not about many of the things you've spoken about, but it's about it's about greed. It's about hunger. It's about this corporate stuff. What would you say to that?
Yeah, so that is something that a lot of people are concerned about is private equity firms buying houses, which has to an extent that has been happening. And I will actually share there's actually a part of the video there where she talks
Oh, there
about
is.
that.
Okay,
So I
great.
will share that.
Last clip for us. Awesome.
Yeah, this is a short clip.
Investment banks are just buying up all the housing anyway.
The third objection focuses on the institutional investors and hedge funds that are just gobbling up housing stock. It's this idea that if hedge funds are going to buy up housing anyway, building more housing won't help the average person.
A lot of firms are buying up properties, but Blackstone is going so far as to build an entire company out of this strategy. Last year, partnering with Invitation Home. $4.5 billion later, the firm has become the biggest buyer of single-family homes in America.
Well, here's what Invitation Homes disclosed to investors. Quote,
We have select markets that we believe will experience strong population, household formation, and employment growth, and exhibit constrained levels of new home construction.
Exhibit constrained levels of new home construction. They are specifically targeting places that don't build enough housing, acknowledging that this is what makes prices rise. They even warned investors, quote,
We could also be adversely affected by overbuilding, which could result in an excess supply of homes and reduce occupancy and rental rates. Continuing development will increase the supply of housing and exacerbate competition for residents.
So they even concede the flip side. Building more housing is what keeps rents down. Hedge funds would not be buying up homes unless there was something really messed up about the housing market that made them a lucrative acquisition. So if you really want to stick it to the greedy hedge funds, make housing not profitable. Build more of it. Objection number.
Alrighty.
Huh.
Yeah, so that I thought that was pretty interesting to actually see like what they're saying about it. I think it's understandable that a lot of people are concerned, and I think it's helpful to keep in mind like the private equity firms they didn't create the problem, although they are certainly taking
They'll definitely bank off of it. 100%.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yes, right. Yeah, I think that kind of like the 1% and the billionaires are kind of a convenient villain, right? I don't think any of us personally knows a billionaire, but I think there are instances where there can be more nuance to it than that. And I
It's a
think
convenient villain, but it's more so a way for us to just not take responsibility and not work. So it's an easy way to say it's not solvable, right? If we just blame everything on the billionaires,
exactly.
then but what I've heard from you from the beginning is there is actually a solution to this, and actually it's in the works. So long as we don't turn our gears against it. The more we are constantly opposing it, more we lean into it, there is a solution. So, and there are people who are actively working towards this. It just needs more people on board. More people on board to say yes, to speak.
That's a great reminder that I would love to share the organization that I volunteer with, YIMBYs of Nova. So we
I love the name.
Yeah. So YIMBY, if anyone has not heard that term, it stands for Yes in My Backyard. Oops, let me share my screen. That's what I meant to do. All right. So we are a local volunteer organization, and basically our goal is to say yes to housing in Northern Virginia so that we can fix our housing shortage. So I definitely would encourage everyone, if this was interesting to you and you want to kind of see more about this, you can sign up for our email list. So just right here, you can sign up for our email list and kind of see, what we have going on and what opportunities there are to do a little bit to help with this, right? Some things that we often will ask for help with is things like writing a letter to your local government in support of housing, whether it's a specific development that's proposed or a more general plan. As I said, a lot of stuff with the, state level bill for faith in housing. Sometimes it's writing to your state legislators for state level bills that can help. And then sometimes, coming out to a community meeting that's about either specific proposed housing or, longer term planning or rule changes related to housing to help, be there in person to say yes. And I know it's not always the case for nonprofits, but like for UMBC of Nova, like we truly do need people's volunteer support more than we need their money. Because like the more like names and faces our local governments see saying yes, we want housing, then the better that is. So I, would definitely encourage you to sign up for our emails if this was interesting
Yes.
to you and you want to learn more.
Thank you, Phoebe. That's awesome. I did not know it stood for yes in my backyard.
Yes.
I love that. Thank you. So we're gonna say yes in our backyard. It is happening. It is happening for real in our backyard. And there are lots of conversations happening in our neighborhoods. There are lots of conversations happening right here. And so let's dig in and see where we can contribute towards believing that there is a solution.
Yes.
Not believing that it's bigger or over our heads, bigger than us. Something that is uniquely the kingdom of God is believing that it can be now. Right?
Yes. Very much.
Let's lean into that. Thank you so much. We're so grateful for you to share this time. I want to believe we're going to have many more conversations about this. This is just a dose, and I can't wait to get our people together and begin really chatting about this deeply. I appreciate you, and keep fighting the good fight. I know it affects you too, right? Like this is not being a single person in Nova is a part of this chain. It is hard. You can't so. Thank you, Phoebe.
Yeah. Thank you so much for planning this, and thank you also to everyone who's